Hello, my name is Michael Bays, and today we'll be discussing from the definition and meaning of psychology to the anatomy of psychology. All the things we do, actions, behaviors, and even things we do subconsciously stem from the study. You are using psychology right now as I speak because the words that I am projecting are going to your brain, and your brain is processing my speech to help you understand what I am saying. To begin with our discussion today, psychology is the study of the brain and all its functions, including the behavior of the given context. This led to many goals and inspirations to finally figure out one's mind. To back up this definition, there were some theorists who had many different point of views of the study. For example, William Wundt, which is the maker of objective introspection. Objective introspection is the process of objectively examining and measuring one's thoughts and mental activities. He did experiments such as placing rocks in students' hands, and the students would tell him everything about the rock and what they were feeling. Another theorist is William James, who is responsible for functionalism. Functionalism was influenced by Charles Darwin's idea of natural selection. Functionalism focuses on how the mind allows people to adapt, live, work, and play. Another one would be Max Wertheimer, responsible for Gestalt psychology. Gestalt is a German word for configuration. The Gestalt psychology focuses on perception and sensation, particularly the perception of patterns and Hall figures. And the last theorist I'd like to talk about is Sigmund Freud, which is responsible for psychoanalysis. It is sort of like psychotherapy, but it has emphasized the revealing of unconscious conflicts. The only way these theorists could have came up with these ideas came through research. Research is the systematic investigation of materials and sources to make new conclusions and new facts. Research is important because it helps the many theories that have been expressed came out to be, but to establish these new facts, the theorists had to use the well-known process known as the scientific method. The scientific method is the method of an experiment procedure to test an outcome. Now, to the scientific method, there are 6 steps. The first one is ask the question, what do you want the experiment to be over? The second one is research. Make some research on the topic you would like to experiment over to learn more about what you are trying to learn. The third step is, form your hypothesis of what you want to experiment. The hypothesis is basically, the testing statement, the experiment you're about to test. And then the fourth step is the experiment. So test your hypothesis many of different times in different ways relating to your experiment. The fifth is to analyze your data, which means once you're done with your many experiments, you need to record your data. And the last step is to accept or reject, to see if your data works or not. You have to make plenty of experiments and stuff. It can't just be one. On a side note, there are many of careers in psychology, such as a clinical psychologist, which these people diagnose patients with emotional and mental disorders. Another one could be comparative psychologists, which these people plan different experiments to create more proof of psychology. And a third would be counseling psychologists, which these people offer counseling to many different people from schools all the way to rehabilitation centers. The last career I'd like to talk about is a developmental psychologist, which they help with people who are in adolescence, whom are changing in their mental and emotional states. Now let's get to the anatomy part of psychology. Let's start off with the human nervous system, which is the human nervous system is the total of the tissues that move around the body to distribute information. And there are 4 parts of the brain. The frontal lobe, which is for planning and organizing the incoming information. Parietal lobe, which are on both sides, which they're made for taking in sensory and visual information. Temporal lobes, where your temples are, they're for processing languages and for storing info for long-term memory. And then your occipital lobe, on the lower back of your head, used for visual cortex. Now let's get to neurons. So the cell body, which is the cell's life support, and then which are connected to the cell body, which are dendrites, which are made for receiving messages from other cells. The axon stem connecting the cell body to the terminal branches of the axon are used for passing messages away from the cell body to the other neurons, muscles, or glands. And then the myelin sheath, jelly-like beans that cover the axon, help speed neural impulses. And then the last is the terminal branches of axon, which form junctions with other cells. Now, neurotransmitters are a substance that transmits nerve impulses across the synapse. There are many types of neurotransmitters, such as dopamine, which involves attention, problem-solving, memory, and pleasure. Serotonin, which involves with your mood, sleep cycle, pain control, and digestion. GABA, which helps with anxiety and fear, and it is actually a motor control. Neuroadrenaline, which is the excitement area that deals with the fight or flight scenario, and there's many more. Now, the endocrine system is the controlling system that takes over the cells, tissues, and organs through hormones. Now, some definitions in psychology. There are many, but I'll name off a few. Sensation, a type of physical feeling when something meets your body. Perception, being able to become aware of something around you using your senses. Consciousness, being awake and being aware of your surroundings. Learning, being able to process new information. Memory, something remembered from the past. Cognition, process of understanding through your senses and experience. Intelligence, the measurement of your IQ and your ability of understanding. Language, the way we communicate to each other. Health, the state of being away from illness or injury. Stress, a state of emotion, tension from very difficult tasks. And critical thinking, the use of thinking with an open mind or thinking outside of the box when trying to understand something. But that's just a few. Now, let's talk about drug addiction. Drugs are very addicting, such as tobacco with the addictive content such as nicotine. Drugs such as corticosteroids can make you very depressed along with beta blockers. However, drugs such as caffeine will make you jittery and happy, but as soon as body becomes more immune, it tells the brain that it wants more to make up for the same experience. Now let's talk about the sexually transmitted infections. There are 4 types. Sexually transmitted diseases, also known as STDs, these are passed through sexual contact. The signs of STDs may be burning, urination, pain during intercourse, and many more. Another type is gonorrhea, which is a type of STD that involves inflammatory discharge from the urethra. Another type is syphilis, which is another type of infection that happens during intercourse, but it is unfortunately by infection of a developing fetus. And the last type is herpes, which is the virus that affects the skin, usually with blisters on your lip or affecting nervous system. Now, the stages of development across a lifespan. There are actually 6 stages, and I'll talk about that. So, the first stage is infancy. This is where you're a baby and you don't know any rights from wrongs. Rather, you eat and sleep with the care of your mother and father. And you don't really, know anything. The second stage is childhood, to where you begin to learn your rights and wrongs, and begin to grow and develop some sort of little memories. The third stage is adolescence, and this is when you hit puberty and develop a lot of hormones, usually around the age of 12 and 15. The fourth stage is adulthood, early adulthood. This is when you're pretty much a grown person and is starting to learn the basics of life. So probably in your 20s or late 20s, early 30s. And then middle age. This is the area of life when you start to hit menopause and midlife crisis. So in your 40s. And then older age, which is the part of life where everything starts to shut off in your body and becomes difficult to complete, such as simple as tasks, such as going to the grocery store, and many other things, The last thing I would like to talk about is specific psychological disorders. These are basically types of mental disorders. It could have been something that has happened in the past, or could have been something passed through DNA. The person could act abnormal or could act very odd in a normal scenario, but it's usually treated with medicine or counseling. Usually. To conclude this discussion, psychology is the study of a way the human mind functions. There are many disorders and infections that could lead to the changing of the brain, but everything we know today about psychology came from many of theorists, and you can change the world too. Thank you for listening.